The rain came down hard that November evening. Cold, relentless. The kind that soaked through coats and chilled bones. Outside Buckingham Palace, hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder behind metal barriers. They clutched flowers, photos, handwritten notes. Their faces were pale, eyes red from crying. The Queen had died 3 days ago. The silence was thick, heavy. No one spoke above a whisper. Cameras flashed occasionally, but even the photographers seemed afraid to make noise. It felt like the whole country was holding its breath. At the center of it all stood the royal guard, tall, unmoving, dressed in red and black rifles at their sides. Their faces were stone. They had been trained for this. Trained to stand perfectly still no matter what happened around them, no matter how they felt inside. But one guard was different. His name was Lieutenant James Calloway, 32 years old. 10 years of service. He had stood watch during state ceremonies, royal weddings, national celebrations. He had seen crowds before, but never like this, never this grief. James stood at attention near the palace gates. His jaw was tight, his eyes forward. Rain dripped from the brim of his bearskin hat, sliding down his face like tears, but he did not move, could not move. The rules were clear. A royal guard does not break formation. Not for anything then. He saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 years old. She wore a yellow raincoat, bright against the gray sky. Her brown hair was wet, sticking to her cheeks. She held a single white rose in both hands. Her mother stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. The woman's face was streaked with tears. The girl stared at the palace gates, at the flowers piled high, at the cards and pictures and candles people had left. Her lips trembled. She looked down at the rose in her hands, then back at the gates. She wanted to place it there, to say goodbye, but the barrier was too far, and the crowd was too thick. No one was moving. No one was crossing the line. The girl's mother whispered something. The girl shook her head. Her small voice broke through the silence. "I can't reach." Every guard heard it, but they stood still, eyes forward. That was the rule. The girl's mother tried to guide her to the side to find another spot, but the girl pulled away. She looked up at her mother with wide, desperate eyes. "I promised," the girl said. "I promised I'd bring her a flower." Her voice cracked. Fresh tears spilled down her face. The mother knelt down, hugging her daughter close. She whispered something soft, something kind. But the girl only cried harder. She gripped that white rose so tight, the stem bent in her hands. James felt something twist in his chest. He told himself to stay still, to focus, to breathe. But his eyes kept drifting back to the little girl in the yellow raincoat, to her shaking shoulders, to the way she stared at those palace gates like they were a million miles away. And then something happened that no one expected. If you're watching this, stay until the end. You won't believe what happened next. And if you love powerful true stories like this, hit subscribe so you never miss one. The girl stepped forward, just one step, small, hesitant. Her mother reached for her, but the girl moved again. Another step. Closer to the barrier, closer to the line no one else had dared to cross. The crowd noticed. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. What is she doing? Is she going to? Someone stop her. But no one moved. Not the crowd. Not the police officers nearby. Not even her mother. Everyone just watched. The girl reached the barrier. She looked down at the white rose, then up at the palace. Her lips moved, silent words only she could hear. A prayer. A promise. A goodbye. She lifted one small leg, climbed over the barrier, and stepped onto the sacred ground. The crowd gasped. Asterisk time seemed to stop. The little girl stood there, alone on the wrong side of the barrier. Rain poured down. Her yellow raincoat glowed under the gray sky. She clutched the white rose against her chest. Her eyes were locked on the palace gates, 20 feet ahead. Behind her, the crowd erupted in panicked whispers. She's not supposed to be there. Someone's going to grab her. The guards, the guards. Everyone turned to look at them. 5 men in red uniforms stood like statues, expressionless, unmoving. They had seen the girl cross the line. They had to have seen her, but they did nothing. James Calloway felt his heart hammering in his chest. His hands gripped his rifle. Sweat mixed with rain on his face. He stared straight ahead, but every part of him was focused on the girl. The little girl who had just broken protocol, who was now standing in a restricted area during a national moment of mourning. Protocol was clear. If someone crossed the barrier, you stopped them. You called for backup. You removed them from the area, quickly, quietly, with respect. But with firmness. That was the rule. But James didn't move. The girl took another step. Then another. Slow, careful. Like she was walking on sacred ground. Because she was. Her small shoes splashed in puddles. The rose trembled in her hands. A police officer near the barrier lifted his radio. James saw it from the corner of his eye. The officer hesitated, his finger hovering over the button. He looked at the girl. Then at the guards. Waiting for someone to do something? No one did. The girl was halfway to the gates now. She passed a pile of flowers taller than she was. Teddy bears with crowns. Cards with the Queen's face. Candles flickering under makeshift plastic covers. The rain made everything shine. Everything looked softer, sadder. The girl stopped. She stared at the flowers. At the sheer size of it all. Hundreds of bouquets. Thousands of messages. So much love. So much loss. For a moment it seemed like she would turn back. Like the weight of it all was too much. Her shoulders slumped. Her chin dropped. But then she looked down at her rose. That single white rose. And she remembered why she was there. She moved forward again. The crowd watched in complete silence. No one coughed. No one shifted. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. This wasn't a moment to capture. This was a moment to witness. James felt something break inside him. Not the rules. Not his training. Something deeper. Something human. He had a daughter. She was 10. Her name was Lily. He hadn't seen her in 3 weeks. Duty had kept him here, standing watch, protecting the palace, honoring the Queen. He had missed her birthday. Missed her school play. Missed tucking her in at night when he called home. Lily's voice was always small, disappointed, but she never complained. She just said she loved him, that she was proud of him. She sounded like this little girl. And James realized something in that moment. Something that changed everything. The rules were made to protect order, to maintain dignity, to honor tradition, but sometimes rules were made to be broken. Sometimes a single act of compassion mattered more than all the protocol in the world. The girl reached the palace gates. She knelt down. Her yellow raincoat pooled around her. She placed the white rose carefully on the ground, right at the center of the iron bars. Her small hands pressed it flat, making sure it wouldn't blow away. Then she did something no one expected. She saluted. A small, clumsy salute. The kind a child makes when they've seen it on TV, but never done it before. Her hand wobbled at her forehead, but her eyes were serious, respectful, full of love. "Goodbye, Your Majesty," she whispered. Her voice was so soft, so pure, but in that silence, everyone heard it. The crowd broke. Someone sobbed. Then another. Then dozens. Grown men wiped their eyes. Women clutched their chests. The grief that had been bottled up for days came flooding out all at once, and still. The guards stood frozen. The little girl stood up. She turned around, ready to walk back. But then she saw something that made her stop, made her freeze in place. One of the guards was looking at her, not forward, not at the horizon like he was supposed to. Directly at her, it was Lieutenant James Calloway. His face was still stone. But his eyes were soft, human. They held something the crowd couldn't quite name: understanding, respect, permission. The girl stared at him. She didn't know what to do. She had broken the rules. She was in trouble. She had to be, but the guard didn't move to stop her. Instead, Slowly, so slowly that at first no one was sure it was happening, he nodded. Just once. A tiny dip of his chin, it said. You did the right thing. The girl's eyes widened. Her lips parted. Then, without thinking, she nodded back. And that's when James Calloway did something that would make headlines around the world. He stepped out of formation. The sound of his boot hitting the wet pavement echoed like thunder. Every head turned. Every eye widened. A royal guard had just broken stance. In public, during a national mourning, in front of hundreds of witnesses, it was unthinkable. The other guards didn't move, didn't even blink. But James could feel their shock, could sense their questions. What are you doing? Have you lost your mind? Maybe he had. James took another step, then another. His rifle remained at his side. His posture stayed perfect, military, controlled. But his eyes never left the little girl in the yellow raincoat. She stood frozen, terrified, confused. She thought she was in trouble. Thought the guard was coming to remove her, to scold her. Her mother's voice called out from behind the barrier, sharp with panic. Sophie. Sophie, come back. But Sophie didn't move. She couldn't. She was locked in place, watching the guard approach. James stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, she was even smaller than he'd thought. Her face was streaked with rain and tears. Her nose was red from crying. The white rose lay behind her at the gates, already wilting in the weather. For a moment, they just stared at each other. A soldier and a child. Both soaked. Both struggling with emotions too big for words. Then James did something that shattered every rule he'd ever learned. He knelt down. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Somewhere, a woman started crying again. A royal guard kneeling before a civilian was rare. Kneeling before a child who had broken protocol? Unheard of. But James didn't care anymore. He looked Sophie in the eyes. His voice was low, gentle. The voice of a father, not a soldier. You loved her very much, didn't you? Sophie's lip quivered. She nodded. Her voice came out in a broken whisper. My gran said the queen was like everyone's grandmother, that she watched over us. But now she's gone, and gran's crying all the time, and I just wanted to say goodbye. Words tumbled out in a rush, like they'd been trapped inside for days. Her small hands twisted together, squeezing until her knuckles turned white. James felt something crack in his chest. He thought of his own daughter, of how Lily would feel if something happened to him, how she would need to say goodbye. How important that would be. You did say goodbye, James said quietly. You brought her a flower. You honored her. That took courage. Sophie's eyes widened. I'm not in trouble? James shook his head. No, you're not in trouble. He reached into his jacket. Slowly, carefully, his hand emerged, holding something small. A pin, a tiny emblem of the Royal Guard, the kind given to children during palace tours. James had carried it for years, gift he'd meant to give Lily but never found the right moment, until now. He held it out to Sophie. This is for you. For being brave? For honoring the queen the way she deserved? Sophie stared at the pin. Then at James. Her small hand reached out, trembling, and took it. She held it like it was made of gold, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Thank you, she whispered. James nodded. Then slowly he stood. He offered his hand. Sophie took it. Her small fingers disappeared inside his gloved palm. Together, they walked back toward the barrier. The crowd erupted in applause. It started small. One person clapping, then 2, then 10, then everyone. The sound rolled through the street like thunder. People cheered, whistled, some shouted, God bless you. Others just cried, their hands pressed to their mouths. Sophie's mother was sobbing behind the barrier. The police officer, who had almost called for backup, lowered his radio, his eyes glistening. Even some of the other guards, though they would never admit it, felt there. Throats tightened, James helped Sophie over the barrier. Her mother grabbed her immediately, pulling her into a crushing hug. She looked up at James through her tears. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you so much." James gave a small nod. He didn't trust himself to speak. If he opened his mouth, he might break down completely. He turned to walk back to his post. But before he took 2 steps, Sophie's voice called out, "Mr. Guard." He stopped, looked back. Sophie was holding up the pin, clutching it to her chest like a treasure. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. "I'll keep this forever," she said. James felt his eyes burn. He snapped a crisp salute, not to the palace, not to the Queen, to her, to Sophie. A little girl who had more courage than most adults, she saluted back. Still clumsy, still imperfect, but full of heart. Then James turned and marched back to his position. He resumed his stance, rifle at his side, eyes forward. Back to stone. But everything had changed. The crowd stayed longer than usual that night. They didn't want to leave. The story of what they had witnessed was already spreading. Phones buzzed with messages. Videos were being uploaded. Within an hour, the clip of James kneeling before Sophie would be viewed by millions. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was a little girl who got to say goodbye, and a soldier who remembered why he put on the uniform in the first place. Not for the rules, not for the protocol, but for the people. For moments like this, for humanity, as the rain continued to fall, James stood perfectly still. But inside, something had shifted. Something had healed. He thought of Lily, of going home soon, of holding her tight and telling her he loved her. And he thought of Sophie, of the white rose at the palace gates, of the way compassion could break through even the strictest rules. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step forward when no one else dares. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is kneel. The video went viral overnight. By morning, every major news outlet had picked it up. Royal Guard breaks protocol to comfort grieving child. Moment of humanity at Buckingham Palace. The salute that made the world cry. The clip had been filmed by dozens of phones. Some angles showed James stepping out of formation. Others captured the moment he knelt. One particularly clear video showed Sophie's face, the way her fear melted into relief, then gratitude. That clip alone had 20 million views by noon. The comments poured in by the thousands. "This is what true service looks like. I'm sitting at my desk crying. This guard is a hero. The Queen would have been proud." This little girl showed more courage than most adults. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the barracks at Wellington, Lieutenant James Calloway sat alone in a small office. His uniform was perfectly pressed. His posture was straight, but his hands were clasped tight in his lap. Across from him sat Colonel Richard Pemberton, 58 years old. Career military. A man who had dedicated his entire life to tradition, order, and discipline. His face was hard, unreadable. "Do you know why you're here, Lieutenant?" James nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then explain to me what you were thinking." The words were measured, calm, but there was steel underneath. James had known this was coming, had known it the moment he stepped out of formation. But he didn't regret it, couldn't regret it. "I was thinking about a little girl who needed to say goodbye," James said quietly, "and that sometimes compassion is more important than protocol." The colonel's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his fingers steepled on the desk. "You broke formation. In front of hundreds of witnesses. During a national period of mourning. Do you understand the gravity of that?" "I do, sir." "The Royal Guard is not just a job, Lieutenant. It's a symbol, a tradition that goes back centuries. When you put on that uniform, you represent something bigger than yourself. You represent stability, order, reliability. People need to know that no matter what happens, the Guard stands firm." James met his eyes. "And what do we stand for, sir? If not for the people?" The colonel paused. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe respect. But it was gone in an instant. "You placed your personal feelings above your duty." "No, sir. I placed humanity above rigidity. There's a difference." The room fell silent. Outside, Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Muffled voices drifted through the walls. But in this office, time seemed suspended. Colonel Pemberton leaned back in his chair. He studied James for a long moment. Then he sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had fought 1,000 battles and knew when he was facing one he couldn't win. You've put me in an impossible position, Lieutenant. By the book, you should be reprimanded, possibly suspended. Your actions violated multiple regulations. James nodded. He had expected this, was prepared for it. But the colonel continued, the public response has been overwhelming. The palace has received thousands of letters, emails, calls, all praising what you did. The press is calling you a hero. The Prime Minister's office has reached out. Even members of the royal family have commented privately that it was a beautiful gesture. The royal family. The colonel almost smiled. Almost. He made the crown look compassionate, human, in a time when people desperately needed to see that. So while I cannot officially condone what you did, I also cannot punish you for it. Not without causing a public relations nightmare. Relief flooded through James, but it was short-lived. However, the colonel said, his tone sharpening again, this cannot happen again. Do you understand me? The next time you break protocol, there will be consequences. I don't care if it's for a child, a puppy, or the Prime Minister himself. You will follow orders. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. James stood, saluted, turned to leave. But as his hand touched the door handle, the colonel's voice stopped him. Lieutenant. James looked back. The colonel's face had softened. Just a fraction, but enough. What you did yesterday, he said quietly. It reminded me why I joined in the first place. So thank you. Off the record. James felt his chest tighten. He nodded, unable to find words. Then he stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him. The relief he felt lasted exactly 3 seconds, because waiting for him in the corridor was a woman he didn't recognize. Mid-40s sharp suit, a press badge hanging from her neck. Lieutenant Calloway, she said brightly. I'm Rebecca Lawson from the BBC. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about yesterday. James tensed. I'm not authorized to speak to the press. Just a few quick questions. The public wants to hear from you. You're a hero, Lieutenant. I'm just a soldier doing my job. But what you did was extraordinary. Didn't it feel like you were taking a risk? Breaking the rules? James's jaw tightened. He could see it now. The angle she was working? The story she wanted. Rebel soldier defies orders to help child? It sounded noble, romantic. But it wasn't the truth. I don't have anything to say, James said firmly. Excuse me. He walked past her, his pace quick and deliberate, but she followed. What about Sophie? Have you spoken to her since yesterday? Do you plan to stay in touch? James stopped, turned. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it. Sophie is a little girl who deserved respect, not a media spectacle. If you care about her at all, you'll leave her and her family alone. Rebecca blinked. For a moment, she looked genuinely taken aback. Then she recovered, her professional smile returning. Of course. But surely you understand the public interest in this story? It's inspiring. It's private. James didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor. But even as he left the barracks, even as he stepped out into the cold November air, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The video was everywhere. His face was everywhere. And the world, it seemed, wanted more. Asterisk 3 days later, James received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just his name written in careful looping handwriting. He opened it during his lunch break. Sitting alone at a small table in the barracks mess hall, inside was a drawing. It showed a girl in a yellow raincoat standing next to a guard in a red uniform. They were holding hands. Above them, crudely drawn raindrops fell from a gray sky. At the bottom, in large, uneven letters, it read, "Thank you for being kind. Love, Sophie." James stared at it for a long time. His chest ached. His eyes stung. He carefully folded the drawing and slipped it into his wallet, right next to a photo of Lily. But the letter wasn't the only thing waiting for him. That evening, his phone rang. It was his ex-wife, Claire. Her voice was tense. "James, have you seen the news?" "What news?" "They're talking about you again. Some tabloid dug up our divorce. They're speculating about why you did what you did, saying you were trying to compensate for being an absent father." James felt his stomach drop. "What?" "There's a whole article. Pictures of you, me, Lily. They're calling you a hero in public and questioning your choices at home." James, Lily saw it. "She's upset." He closed his eyes, pressed his palm against his forehead. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I never wanted this. I'll fix it." "Eily, you can't fix it. It's already out there. Just call her, okay? She needs to hear from you." The line went dead. James sat in silence for a moment. Then he dialed Lily's number. She answered on the third ring. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hey, sweetheart. I heard you saw something upsetting online." Pause. Then, quietly, they said, "You're a hero, that you helped a little girl. But then they said you're not a good dad because you're never home." James felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Lily, listen to me. What I did at the Palisade had nothing to do with you. I helped that girl because she needed someone, and I was there. But you, sweetheart, you're the most important person in my life. I know I'm not home as much as I should be. I know I miss things. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean I'm not thinking about you every single day." Silence. Then a sniffle. "I miss you, Dad." "I miss you too, Lil. So much. And I promise, when this tour is over, we're going to spend real time together. Just you and me, okay?" "Okay." They talked for a few more minutes. About school. About her friends. About a science project she was working on. Normal things. Safe things. By the end, Lily sounded better. But James knew the damage had been done. The media had dragged his family into this, had turned a moment of compassion into a spectacle. And it didn't stop there. Over the next week, the story took on a life of its own. News outlets interviewed psychologists who analyzed James's actions. Social media debated whether he was a hero or a rule breaker. Think pieces were written about the tension between duty and humanity. Some people defended him fiercely. Others said he had set a dangerous precedent. That if guards could break protocol whenever they felt emotional, the entire system would collapse. James tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on his work. But everywhere he went, people recognized him. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him. Others glared, muttering about discipline and respect. He felt like he was drowning then. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. A car pulled up to the barracks. Black, expensive, a palace insignia on the door. A man in a suit stepped out and approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Lieutenant James Calloway. On behalf of the royal family." 20 minutes later, James sat in a private room, face to face with Sir Anthony Greaves, a senior advisor to the king. The man was in his 60s. Gray hair, kind eyes. He spoke with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades navigating the delicate balance of tradition and change. "Lieutenant Calloway, the king wanted me to deliver a message personally. He was deeply moved by what you did." As was the entire family. James blinked. "I thank you, sir. But I only did what felt right. And that's precisely why it mattered. In a time of profound grief, you reminded the nation what it means to be human. To lead with compassion, the Queen herself would have approved."
Hey.
James felt his throat tighten. "That means more than you know, sir." Sir Anthony leaned forward. "The family wants to honor you. A commendation. A formal recognition of your service. It would be presented at a private ceremony next month." James hesitated. "Sir, I appreciate that, truly. But I don't want to be honored for breaking the rules. I don't want other guards to think that's acceptable." "You weren't breaking the rules, Lieutenant. You were embodying the spirit they were created to protect. There's a difference." James nodded slowly. "What about Sophie? Will she be there?" Sir Anthony smiled. If she wishes. We've been in contact with her family. They're overwhelmed, but grateful. Sophie keeps the pin you gave her on her bedside table. She looks at it every night. Something loosened in James's chest. Hearing that made everything worth it. The scrutiny, the criticism, the sleepless nights. Knowing that one little girl felt seen, felt valued. That was enough. I'll accept the commendation, James said quietly. But only if the focus stays on Sophie. She's the brave one, not me. Sir Anthony extended his hand. You're a good man, Lieutenant. The kind of person the Guard needs more of. They shook hands. And for the first time in days, James felt like he could breathe again. But as he left the meeting, as he stepped back into the cold November air, he knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. Not yet. The ceremony took place on a cold December morning. Windsor Castle. Private. Intimate. No cameras. No press. Just a handful of people who mattered. James stood in full dress uniform. His medals gleamed under the soft chandelier light. His hands were clasped behind his back. He looked every bit the soldier he had been trained to be. But inside, his heart was racing. Across the room, Sophie stood with her mother. She wore a navy blue dress and patent leather shoes. Her hair was neatly braided. She clutched a small purse in both hands, nervous but trying to be brave. When she saw James, her face lit up. She waved. James smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes. The king entered quietly. No fanfare. No formality. Just a man in a tailored suit with tired eyes and the weight of a nation on his shoulders. He had only been king for a few months. The grief of losing his mother was still fresh. Lieutenant Calloway, the king said, his voice warm. Thank you for being here. It's an honor, Your Majesty. The king turned to Sophie. He knelt down, just as James had done weeks ago. And you must be Sophie. I've heard a great deal about you. Sophie's eyes went wide. She curtsied awkwardly, but with effort. Hello, Your Majesty. You did something very brave, the king said gently. You honored my mother in a way that touched the world. Thank you. Sophie's cheeks flushed. She glanced at her mother, then back at the king. I just wanted to say goodbye. And you did, beautifully. The king stood. He gestured for James and Sophie to join him near a small table where a velvet box rested. Inside was a medal, simple, elegant, engraved with the royal crest. Lieutenant Calloway. This commendation is given in recognition of exceptional service, not just to the crown, but to the people. You've reminded us all what it means to serve with heart, with humanity. He pinned the medal to James's chest. It was heavier than James expected, not because of the medal, but because of what it represented. Then the king turned to Sophie. And for you, young lady, he handed her a small box. Inside was a brooch, a white rose. Delicate, beautiful, the same flower she had left at the palace gates. This belonged to my mother, the king said quietly. She wore it often. I want you to have it, so you can remember her. And remember the courage it took to honor her. Sophie stared at the brooch. Her lip trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. Really? Really? Sophie's mother covered her mouth, crying. Sophie carefully took the brooch, holding it like it was made of glass. I'll take care of it. Forever. I know you will. The ceremony could have ended there. But the king had one more surprise. There's someone else I'd like you both to meet. A door opened. A young girl stepped through. 10 years old. Blonde hair pulled into a ponytail. Bright eyes full of curiosity. Lily. James's breath caught. Lily, she ran to him, threw her arms around his waist. He knelt down, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. What are you doing here? He whispered. The king invited us, Claire said, stepping through the door behind her. She gave James a small, tentative smile. He thought it was important for Lily to see this, to understand why you do what you do. James looked up at the king. Thank you, Your Majesty. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Lieutenant. Just keep being the man you are. The king nodded to everyone in the room. Then, As quietly as he had arrived, he left. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sophie tugged on her mother's hand and walked over to Lily. "Hi," Sophie said shyly. "I'm Sophie." Lily smiled. "I'm Lily. My dad's the guard who helped you." "I know. He's really nice." "Yeah, he is." The two girls looked at each other. Then, without a word, they hugged. It was spontaneous, pure, the kind of connection only children can make. The mothers cried. James wiped his eyes, not even trying to hide it anymore. Later, after the ceremony ended, James walked with Lily through the castle gardens. The air was crisp. Their breath came out in small clouds. Lily held his hand tightly. "Dad." "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm really proud of you." James stopped walking. He looked down at his daughter. Her face was so sincere, so full of love. "I'm proud of you too, Lil, for being patient with me, for understanding." "I saw the video," she said, "of you and Sophie. Everyone at school saw it. They kept asking me questions. At first I didn't know what to say, but then I realized something." "What's that?" "You're not just my dad. You're a lot of people's dad. You protect people. You help them, even when it's hard, and that's really cool." James knelt down, cupped her face in his hands. "You are the most important person in my world. Don't ever forget that." "I won't." They hugged, long and tight. And in that moment, everything else faded away. The scrutiny, the pressure, the rules, all that mattered was this: love, connection, being present. When they finally let go, Lily grinned up at him. "Can we get hot chocolate?" James laughed. "Absolutely." Weeks passed. The media moved on to the next story. The viral video faded from headlines. Life returned to normal, but some things had changed. James requested a transfer to a position with more reasonable hours. He wanted to be home more, to be there for Lily, to not miss any more birthdays or school plays. Sophie went back to school. She wore the rose brooch on special occasions, and every night she looked at the guard pin on her bedside table and smiled. The white rose she had left at the palace. Gates withered and was eventually cleared away with the others, but its impact remained. It became part of the collective memory of that difficult time. A symbol of grief, yes, but also of hope, of compassion, of the belief that even in the darkest moments, humanity shines through, and Lieutenant James Calloway learned something he would carry for the rest of his life. Rules are important. Tradition matters. Discipline has its place. But nothing is more powerful than kindness. Nothing is more lasting than a single act of compassion, because in the end, we're not remembered for how well we followed. Orders. We're remembered for how well we loved, for the moments we chose. Humanity over protocol. For the times we stepped forward when no one else dared. And for the little girl in a yellow raincoat who reminded a soldier what it truly means to serve.